This is the Church of St. Paul in the Desert.
It's a very great blessing for me to be here with you all today. You've given me such a warm welcome, and I'm very grateful indeed. I'd like to open with a little joke told by a colleague of mine. A man sinned greatly. In fact, he sinned so much that his church excommunicated him. He was forbidden to come to the worship service ever again. He repented. He wanted healing, so he went to the Lord and said, "Lord, they won't let me in because I'm a sinner." To which the Lord replied, "What are you complaining about? They won't let me in either." That's from the Ragamuffin Gospel. Today's parable in Luke is a little confusing. It starts out with someone who seems like the perfect religious person on the surface. He fasts, he tithes, he prays, he attends temple, he does all the right things. But wait a minute, Jesus says he's missing something. The Pharisee is a little like this other joke I like. What is sin? It's what other people do. We could really dislike the Pharisee, but sometimes I think that the Pharisees have gotten a bad rap. Think about the way some of the parables have been interpreted over the centuries. The Pharisees have become the bad guys with a black cat, while the tax collectors and sinners have become the heroes in white. At first glance, the parable seems simple. We should not be like the Pharisee, who is self-righteous, and we should be like the tax collector, who is humble. End of story. We can all go home. But is that it? Is that what Jesus is really saying? Because if a moral maxim is all that there is, then where is the good news for those of us who might be just a little like the Pharisee, who think it's only other people who sin? And where is the good news for those of us who already feel terribly unworthy? Neither of these are particularly good places to be, are they? And perhaps many of us are both of these at one time or another. So let's go back to the beginning and slow the parable down a little. Two men go up to the temple to pray. Prayer is the context of the story. It surrounds and locates the story. Preacher William Williamon says it's not surprising to find a story about prayer in Luke's gospel. This is the gospel where Jesus' disciples ask him only one thing: teach us to pray. First of all, notice how the Pharisee prays. He addresses his prayer to God, but after that, it's downhill. His prayer is a prayer of contempt for others and a recitation of all his own good acts and deeds. God, I thank you, I am not like other people. Comparison, contrast. God, if you look at these others, you will definitely see how good I am. The prayer is often considered the epitome of spiritual pride because it's all about me. In contrast, the tax collector's prayer is short. It doesn't offer much style, but it's a prayer that reflects the man's heart and asks for God's mercy. The man knows his need of God, and his inside matches his outside, which is so often a theme for Jesus. So we have a parable that's partly about prayer, but it's also about something else. Jesus was an insightful teacher into the nature of humanity. Pastor Bruce Modal says, Jesus uses this parable to lure us into a trap. Hearing it, we cannot help but be thankful that we are not like the Pharisee, but if we are thankful we are not like him, then we are just like him. It's a trap, but a good trap. And this is the power of a parable, isn't it? Jesus paints us a word picture, and suddenly we see a dynamic at work that we are probably very familiar with. It's the dynamic of putting others down in order to feel better about ourselves. And most of us have seen this dynamic over and over. It's one of the most common ways that we relate to one another. Two children on a playground won't play with a third because of some little difference between them. And this makes the two feel special and close. Or perhaps we've been in a workplace where one group thinks the other group is not as good because the other group is newer or their work seems less important. And even in the church, or maybe especially in the church, because we are so often attached to our positions, we tend to say one group is wrong and the other group is right. And maybe, just maybe, that other group really is self-righteous. Maybe it really does do bad, mean, or hateful things. Some of us in this room here, sadly, are all too familiar with the reality of experiencing someone very much like the Pharisee, someone who has a large dose of spiritual pride and believes that they know the true and only way. Some of us here may have been oppressed or shunned by such persons, whether for our gender, our sexual orientation, our race, our age, our beliefs, or a host of other reasons. And yet, even those of us who have been oppressed are called to deal with this parable, because it's all too easy then for us to shun that Pharisee in return and to start thinking, we're not as bad as those other people. And then we're back in the trap. Jesus shows us how powerful this dynamic is by reversing expected norms and using opposites in a new way. In Jesus' day, there could be no worse list to be on than that of thief, adulterer, and especially tax collector. Tax collectors were like traitors to their fellow Israelites. They collected money for the Romans, the occupiers of the country. The tax collector definitely wore the bad hat in Jesus' day. But what this means then is that the Pharisees' prayer is not criticized because it's untruthful, but because it's criticized because of the way the Pharisee relates to God. He relates through this dynamic of putting down in order to put himself up. Thank God I am not like other people. It seems to be part of our human nature that someone has to be dumb for us to be smart, someone has to be out for us to be in, someone has to be down so we can be up. It's a win-lose way of life. And Jesus has captured this human predicament very well. While he certainly uses opposites to get his point across, he also points to something much larger than dualities. He's pointing to God. Jesus does not ask his disciples to hate self-righteous people, nor does he say people must abase themselves or become falsely humble. Instead, he points to a reversal, a new dynamic at work. All who exalt themselves will be humbled, but all who humble themselves will be exalted. In other words, life doesn't work the way we think it does. Today's gospel brings the very good news that God raises each and every one of us up. Each of us is beloved, cherished, and valued just as we are. We may doubt this gift of our worth or our value, but the gospel tells us it's very real. The name of this gift is God's grace. It's a free gift, not dependent on our work, our deeds, our looks, our success, our strength, or any other human marker. It's a gift given simply because we are, simply because we're God's creation, made in God's image. It matters not if we're a tax collector or a Pharisee. We're loved and valued. And if we can accept this gift, paradoxically, we will be freed of contempt's hold on us. we'll lose the need to put down in order to raise up. Roberta Bondi, church historian, tells the story of being troubled by today's parable. It just never made any sense to her. But one day she read a 6th century sermon by desert father and monastic Dorotheos of Gaza. The men in his monastery were making each other miserable. They were very self-righteous and judgmental. But Bondi says she was surprised to find that Dorotheos did not want his monks to either stop bragging about their good deeds or to acknowledge they were sinners. Instead, Dorotheos told the monks that the Pharisee was doing the right thing when he thanked God for the ability to do good, and the monks should do likewise. The problem of the Pharisee was his contempt. Bondi goes on to say, like Dorotheos' monks, we too live in a world of scorching, escalating judgment, our own and others, and it's grinding us all down. As Christians, how can we escape it? Perhaps we need not so much quit bragging about our goodness and admit we are sinners, as to give up the whole question of whether any of us are sinners. I suspect that if I can acknowledge and learn to thank God when I am able to do something good, I will not have to demonstrate my worth to myself by despising those who are different from me. When I came here, I did not know your motto, which is on the front of your bulletin. It's beautiful. The circles, they say grace, generosity, and gratitude. And today's lesson is really a lesson about grace. So we end where we began with prayer. And I'd just like us to think about that the more we trust God to raise us up, the more we're able to live with grace and humility. As Christians in a complex and changing world, we're asked to hold on to the vision of God's wholeness beyond dualities of Pharisee and tax collector. We're asked to see how we're more alike than we are different. Perhaps we may pray today, God, we thank you that we are a lot like other people. Even with all our unique and wonderful differences, we are like each other in our strengths and our weaknesses. We give thanks that you love us and raise us all up because you have put your Spirit in us. Increase in us the gifts of grace, gratitude, and generosity. Amen.